Good morning, folks. I'm very pleased to have you as a guest in the city of Westminster, even though this is in the environs of the city. We still consider it our home. The college has been able to provide us with an excellent place to learn, and you have a great topic, Forestry, to learn about. What I'd like to do is, so that you can acknowledge them when you see them, to acknowledge my staff who assisted in getting this workshop put together along with other cooperative folks. Eric Schlitcher is our city arborist. Are you in here, Eric? Eric's back there. Thank you. Miss Samantha Patry is the administrative coordinator who is in the green shirt out at the registration desk. And Mr. Andrew Gray, comprehensive planner. Are you in there? Andrew's right there. And I saw Miss Sandy Anderson in here. Is she here? Okay, there she is back there. I didn't have her on my list, but I knew I saw her. Is there any other city employees here? Okay. All right, thank you. And I would also like to welcome the Westminster Tree Commission members, Mr. Stephen Algeier, chairman, sitting back there. He's a neighbor of mine, so I see him walking all the time. Miss Cindy Mays, Richard Wilbur, thank you, and Howard Wilt. Thank you all. I know that they work very hard assisting us in the city, and we have a great program. I would like to start off by saying thank you for coming to Westminster, and we want to especially welcome our friend as the acting state forester, Mr. Dan Van Hassen, who is back in the corner. Thank you for coming. I'd like to also welcome, he is from the Maryland Forestry Service. I would also like to welcome Dr. Edward Gilman, professor at the University of Florida, right up front. Thank you for coming. This year we are celebrating in Westminster the 23rd Annual Urban and Community Forestry Workshop and the 23rd year that the City of Westminster and the Westminster Tree Commission have hosted the event. Many of our participants in the Tree City USA program, many of you do. We are pleased to report that Westminster is once again a tree city, and this marks our 26th year. So we started just a little bit before the program did, but we have been a tree city since 1989. We also received the Growth Award for the 21st time. This year, our Heritage Trail located at Beneserve Park is nearing completion. Along with the trail, there are QR codes that are attached to certain trees. Those who have smartphones can scan the QR codes to find out the type of tree and their history. Once again, we are joined by Bartlett tree service experts in our long-standing cooperative effort to bring you these workshops. Without Bartlett, these workshops would not happen. So for the Bartlett tree service folks, how many of you are here? Okay. Don't be shy. We thank you. And as well, we want to thank BGE Constellation Energy for their generous support year after year. And in a moment, you'll hear from their representative. BG&E, where are you? Constellation Energy. Okay, they're back in the back there. We trust that the professional training and professional relationships gained from this workshop will continue to serve your communities. And I know, because yesterday my wife spoke to 2 or 3 folks from Berlin, that there are folks that travel from Berlin. Where are you? I just want to recognize you. Thank you for coming. Anybody else further away from than Berlin? Anybody? Florida, I know. That's, Berlin, Germany. Yeah, it could be Berlin, Germany. So, where from?
I was wondering, was it Berlin?
No, we're talking Berlin, Maryland. What is the designation you all have? The coolest city in America? That's right. Berlin is the coolest city in America. 2 final notes before we move forward. Please remember that this is a tobacco-free campus and no smoking is permitted anywhere on the property. Save the date. Get your calendars out, mark it down. The 24th Urban and Community Forestry Workshop will be held right here on October 7th, 2016. So with that being said, I want to again thank you for coming, and please ask our staff if you have any issues to assist you, and I will now turn it back over. Thank you for coming.
that mic working? Is that working? Can you guys hear me okay? How about now? Does that work? Very good. So that's, I guess we'll close that one. Well, good morning. I've only met about a third of you this morning. So we've got about 100 slides or so to go through. Seems like I do this for a living. So if you're going to fall asleep during this presentation, that's okay, I don't mind. But I'm going to visit you if you're sleeping. That's why I'm walking around here. This is the thing I want you to take home. Is probably one of the most important things to understand today is that the size of the branch compared to the trunk it's attached to, that ratio is key to pruning a tree to reduce risk of failure. And I'm going to introduce two words called aspect ratio. Aspect ratio, if you buy any electronic piece of equipment, it's the ratio of this to this. So if you buy a computer monitor or a TV, what are the ratios these days of this to this? Anybody know? 16 by 9, right? 16 across by 9. It's going to 21 by 9 from what I read. So that's called aspect ratio. So that term's not new to us, but it's probably new to many of you to arboriculture. And it was coined at least back in the early 70s. I didn't read it back then. I just read it about 15 years ago in a 1970s publication. And the author was citing the size of the branch compared to the trunk above it was called aspect ratio. So the term's been around. Maybe we've reintroduced it, I don't know. But it does govern everything with regard to how strong that branch is attached. Now it says nothing about the wood beyond it. We're just talking about the union itself. So in the right, you see, this is a maple, red maple. We pulled apart the codominant stem above. You see it split down the middle. So what would the aspect ratio of that union be? 1 to 1, thank you. And you're retired, nicely done. And what about the smaller one lower down on the left? What would the aspect ratio of that one be, approximately? So think of the size of the branch compared to the trunk. So maybe 1 to 2, something like that. So this is quite a bit smaller than that. So this is probably between there and there. It's probably 0.6, or half, something like that. Everybody with me where I'm getting those ratios from? So it's simply the diameter of this compared to the diameter there. And if you look, we pulled these apart, measured before. See how small the indentation is here and how large the indentation is right there? That gives you some sense for how much more force it took to pull the small one off of the big rather than to divide, and how easy it was to divide these two. So if we get outside to that, we'll demonstrate that. And I'll give you a very easy way to show other people how this works. So this has everything to do with keeping the unions together during storms and even under the force of gravity, but especially ice, snow, and windstorms. So the reason why this happens, the reason why that's strong when you have a small aspect ratio is because the wood of the branch seems to grow first earlier in the year. That would be the red, particularly red, but I drew it red. So that grows first, and a little bit later in the season, the trunk wood grows over that. You see how the trunk, it's like a gray-brown? So the next year, the same thing will happen. The branch grows first, the trunk grows after it, and year after year, those little bit, and this is only 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch overlap. It's not very much overlap, but neither is the depth of a screw on a lag bolt, right? The threads are not very deep, but man, are they strong. You screw something in a piece of wood, it's not coming out, even though you've got just a small amount of thread. So when you can find these in the woods, what this is actually what this looks like on the inside. If you could decay away all the trunk wood and preserve the branch wood, this is what the union looks like. So you're looking at ridges and valleys of branch wood. And what do you suppose was in the valley in each of these annual growth events? That's now decayed away. The trunkwood. Right, so that slight overlapping every year, there's probably 15 or so annual collars overlapping each other. That's what holds the tree together when the aspect ratio is small. It's not complicated. It's an incredible design. If you think you're smart, go try to attach a branch or a piece of wood to a post without drilling a hole. And that'll give you some sense for just how genius this design is. When the aspect ratio is close to 1, or if it is 1, the wood simply grows against the wood of the other side. There's no overlapping. So this does not develop in that situation. You really know all you need to know about pruning right now. Because you take that and you look at a tree and you say, okay, if I've got this situation, I don't need to do anything to that branch at all. I don't need to prune it. It's strongly attached. Now, there may be some issues out here that we want to deal with from a clearance, aesthetics, or risk, because maybe it's touching a light or something like that. But when we see this, we're going to want to act, especially if the tree is young, or the tree part is young. So if we're dealing with a tree like this, and there's a tree part 60 feet in the air, and those tree parts are fairly young, 15, 20 years, we can address codominance up there, 60 feet up in the air. We're going to focus today on small trees, though, because that's probably what many of us here in the room work on. So the goals then are two. We're going to reduce the growth rate of low branches. And this is probably the hardest part to picture. But first we've got to remember that branches don't move up the trunk. So once a branch is here at 4 feet, it's always here. It does not move up the trunk as the tree grows. That's difficult for many folks that you're probably talking to understand that. My wife didn't understand that. She's lived with me for 36 years until just a few years ago. True story. Absolutely. About 5 or 6 years ago. I never explained it to her. So, and that's not intuitive to people. So, when we get a tree from a nursery and it has branches starting from here and goes up to 12 feet and we plant it in the ground, all those branches are staying right there. And if they all grow, they're going to be in the way. So we're going to show you how to make them temporary branches. And that's basically pruning them. So you want to reduce their growth rate because all those branches on the nursery tree shouldn't be there when that tree is 10 years old. They should pretty much be all gone. That's what happens in the woods. And then the second thing is to reduce the occurrence of upright stems that are competing with one stem that will make the best trunk. Because your goal is to create sort of a hybrid between the elm bushes we see outside and the maple bushes. We call them trees, but I call them bushes, because they have all these low stems. A hybrid between that unmanaged form and the very dominant leader form in the forest. Create a hybrid between those that's pleasing to look at and yet strong. Does that make sense? Yeah? All right, I'm going to show you lots of examples of how to do that. So let's start with a young tree planted in the landscape, and we're going to make just 2 pruning cuts on it. These are going to be different cuts than most people in the room today are making. And we call these reduction cuts, where we're going to reduce the height of everything that competes with that one trunk that will make the leaf. 2 pruning cuts, walk away. Then that tree grows. Because we pruned the sides, they're going to grow slower. That's going to push growth into the center. So the tree's going to get taller, not wider. It's going to get taller. Our goal early on, the first 15 years, is to grow height. Then the spread happens naturally later. We don't want to let spread go too early or we get in trouble. Things start getting blocked. Signs, people, buses, value potential increases because these branches can get very large and tall. They're too low on the top. So the tree is 5, 10 years later. We're going to use the same strategy of making what we call reduction cuts. cuts the bigger of two stems at a union. We're going to cut them back to laterals. I'm going to show you how to do this. And then here we have the first branch on the tree now that's going to be on the tree pretty much permanently. We've got our 15-foot of clearance, and every branch that was on the tree at planting is now gone. That's the model. That's what we're keeping in the back of your head. So I don't need to go through this anymore in my head because I've been thinking this way for 30 years. I consider a red light crew 8 to 10 trees. You just go, okay, bang, bang. If you find yourself doing that on the way home today, there are 1 or 2 people that may really get this, then you've got the start of the learning of how to prune trees. So if you find yourself crazy enough to be pruning trees at the red light. So here's the strategy, is to take, very simple case, I've got 3 stems I drew upright, one's in the middle, it's going to be the leader. And so step 1 is to identify that leader. Step 2 is to identify the competition. Typically it's upright or very big branches. And step 3 is decide whether you're going to provide a 1 ibuprofen or 2 ibuprofen dose. Right? It's the same strategy. What I mean is you're going to take a little bit off because you can go back to the tree every year. You're a Bartlett tree expert company, for example, providing service for a campus or a residence, and you can come back often. Or you're a municipality and you may never get back to the tree ever. Or maybe you're on a 15-year pruning cycle or some other longer period. But the trade-off is you're going to make bigger cuts and the voids are going to be larger. So guess what? Arboriculture, like everything else in life, is a compromise, right? That's just the way it works. So that's what governs. So I'm going to go through it again. Step 1, where's your leader? Step 2, where's the competition? Step 3, where do you cut your competition back to? It's that easy. And every tree we go and prune today, if we've got the weather right, that's as simple as it is. It doesn't get any more complicated than that. Now we'll put a little bit of process to it as we go. So here's a simple case. Not too far from here, just west of us in Ohio. This is a Gleditsia, a honey locust. 3 stems. We're out in the park with a few guys, and we're going to prune the 2 that are not the leader. We decided that we're going to provide a moderate dose. So we're going to push growth into the leader. No cuts were made here. There's a reduction cut there, reduction cut there, a 3rd one up here it looks like, and probably a couple, 3 over here as well. So when we prune these 2, what do you suppose the growth rate is going to do for these 2? They're going to slow down. They're going to slow down. Pruning is a growth slowing process. But since we didn't cut anything on the leader, what's it going to do? It's going to grow at its old rate or even faster. Because you get the same trunk and the same root system. Nothing down there's changed. So it's going to push growth up into the leader. And I'm asking you to believe that right now. I'm going to show you that over time, how that works. I'm going to show you several trees we pruned over 5, 10, 15 years. I'm going to show you how that changes. But I'm showing you the technique first. So this is going to slow down and this is going to speed up. You're just going to have to trust me for about 10 minutes or so. No, actually the next slide. So here we pruned at planting. We have about a 1-to-1 aspect ratio. We're going to make 1 pruning cut, and there's the cut right there. See it? 1 pruning cut, same tree. 2 years later, that's the same tree. Can you find the pruning cut? Pruning cut's right there. So see how much growth we pushed into the leader. See, it was this big when we pruned it. 2 years later, it's now that big. Now, it's also, if you could measure the size of the trunk compared to the size of the branch, you changed what? The ratio, aspect ratio. Nicely done. Now, here's 5 years later, same tree. Same intersection, same tree. Can you find the pruning cut? See, it's way down there. So you've created a branch out of a double leader or a codominant stem. Growers have been doing this, good growers have been doing this for 100 years or more. That's how a leader's developed in a nursery, same thing. So they've understood it. If you go to the western part of North Carolina, for example, and most of North America, about 40 years ago, went to the central leader system for growing our apples, edible apples. You know, it's changed now, it's more of a trellis system now, but for the past 40 years, it's been central leader because the growers realized that under heavy load from the apples, that the small aspect ratio works great. Same thing, so we went from this temporary branch that wouldn't become a double leader, real low in the tree, blocking views, not as strong, more susceptible to ice and snow damage and wind damage, to creating a branch which now you can take off at some later time and nobody will miss it. I told you this wasn't difficult. All right, here, can you do it on a bigger tree? Here's a board-certified national arborist, John Lichter from California, has been addressing this tree for 11 years. Codominant stem, aspect ratio of 1 when he started pruning. Here's 11 years later, and you can see that the aspect ratio has certainly changed, probably from 1 to about a 0.7 or so. So that union has become stronger, and you can envision that slide I had where the red was growing first, and then the trunk grew over it, the red in the branch, and then the trunk grew over it. So that's starting to happen now on this stem. So it's becoming stronger attached as the tree gets older. Tim?
Maybe I can't see it right, but isn't there a weak crotch?
The union here?
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I improved the tree. This is John. I got his phone number. But nice to John. Okay, good. But here's the thing that we've learned is if you prune both sides, in other words, this side is being pruned and subordinated, and this side will grow faster. But if you go up here and try to correct everything that you like to correct, because see, it was there 11 years ago. If you prune too much off of both sides, then neither side will grow faster. So in other words, you've got to correct the biggest situation early. Let this side kind of go. Then when you get this in hand, then you start working the roof. Does that make sense? I mean, it's just, after 5 or 8 years of doing this, you will figure that out, or you can start it tomorrow just by taking that advice and save yourself some trouble. It took me a long time to figure that out. All right, we're going to start the pruned planting, and here's why. Think to yourself, when is someone that like you, that's hearing these words, how often is someone that's sitting here going to be out pruning your trees with the knowledge that you're going to have at the end of today? Probably very small chance of that happening. When is that going to get structured pruning in the next 15 years? So I want to show you some, this is from a newer book that you can also get on Amazon. Here's a double leader at planting. And 25 years later, it's still at the same spot. Both sides grow. No pruning and planting. Very common for that form to occur, and the aspect ratio over time doesn't change. Does the drawings work for you, how that works? Now, do you think that on this live oak from Jacksonville, this is about a 60-mile-an-hour wind, 2007 tropical system came in. Do you think that union, that branch, was on the tree when the tree was planted? Probably was, right? Because branches don't move up the tree. That branch was probably 8 feet off the ground when it was planted. Same place it is now. Now it's sitting on the ground and the tree had to be removed. So it was definitely on the tree when the tree was planted. So pruning one side or the other, you didn't have to take it off, but like we just showed you, reducing it back to a lateral would have pushed growth into a leader, and you wouldn't have that weakness there at that position. How about this in western North Carolina on a golf course someplace, and we'll take a close-up. You can kind of see about 2/3 of that tree's missing. A bunch of this tree is kind of hard, but when you walk up to it, all right, so these trees are starting to fall apart on this golf course, and your guess is as good as mine how old these are, maybe 40, 50 years or something like that. And some might take the attitude, well, that's long enough, and maybe they're right, I don't know. But if this had a better structure, it would have lasted a lot longer. Were those on the tree when the tree was planted? Absolutely. This was probably the top of the tree. This is probably the bottom of the crown. That's telling us a lot. We've been sold the bill of goods, and I was part of the team too that said don't prune and plant because we figured out, some researchers back in the 70s, that when you cut the root system off of a field-grown tree, put that tree into the landscape, we don't have to prune the top to compensate for root loss. Remember when that got in our philosophy about 30 years ago or so? Well, we screwed up. We forgot about destruction. And when we teach tree risk assessment, and Bruce is one of the instructors, Bruce Frederick, and maybe some others in the room, at least some, if not a lot of the issues we look at in urban areas on planted trees are branches that were on the tree when the tree was planted. So that says to me we need to be pruning trees very differently as planting. Also, if you go on my website, you'll see there's 76 planting, tree preservation, soil details, and specifications. So if you're in the business of writing specs for your contractors, whoever they are, or your customers, that's a great start. They're free, they're CAD ready, they're editable. You can bring them into CAD and edit them. Here's one of the 76, and it's a nursery quality stock detail. So these are deemed acceptable. We call out the aspect ratios that are acceptable. You can go in and change those. We call out the branches should be no bigger than 2/3 the size of the trunk. You can change that number if you like. And then we have a rejectable with their aspect ratios as well. So that's just one of 76, and they're also PDF. You can download either one. You don't have to cite us. They're free. There's no catches. There's no catches. You don't have to tell anybody where you got these from the tree. The last thing I wanted to share with you was a crazy machine that we built. This is a $500,000 machine, which one of my engineering buddies built. We were fortunate enough to be able to use it to blow some trees around. And so we pruned some trees, or not, before we blew them. So here's one that was not pruned before we blew 75 to 90 mile an hour winds, left and right. All right, see a lot of motion on that tree. I know we're running short of time here, so I'll just go right to the chase here. Here's where we reduce the height, and watch how little that tree, especially in the middle, look how little the trunk moves. So we only took off 30% of the length of that tree. Now we would never prune a tree like that. That was 6 inches in diameter. But what we're trying to mimic is that 6-inch diameter limb in a big sweet gum or a big oak. So instead of the branches doing this, you know, they're doing this. They're a lot less motion. They're a lot less motion, a lot less likely to break. So what we would do, and this is the last slide, before pruning, this part of the tree looks pretty dense. This tree was struck by lightning. It's got defects up here, cracks. You can't see it in this photograph. We came up, made 4 pruning cuts on these big branches in the upper right, and you can see those cuts there. So we do really the same approach on bigger trees. We're just farther up in the tree, working the younger parts of the crown. You now know enough to be very dangerous. Thanks very much.